Now you hear it.
When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension: time.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. I'm Taylor Baker.
And I'm Michael Clawson.
A hard cop and a soft dame in a brass knuckle thriller, Michael. The Big Heat.
From Fritz Lang, 1953 film noir. Is the topic of today's discussion. How you feel about it?
I feel quite positive on it. The
Nice.
first time I watched it, I was more confused, a little bit more deep into Fritz Lang's, oeuvre now, so it makes a little bit more sense. I have a little bit more respect for some of the breadth, or the absence of depth, even, to some of these, but that breadth almost informing more readings.
Yeah, our second Fritz Lang title in just a matter of
Months.
weeks. Yeah, I can't remember now how long ago we did our 1921 episode where we talked about Destiny.
It was either early March or late February, somewhere in
Yeah, very different Fritz Lang film. Yeah, lots to talk about, but we'll do a first impression of our next rescreening title, which is what?
Marty Scorsese's Cape Fear.
I was his lawyer. But you shackled somehow, right?
And what was he in prison for?
No, really. What did you do?
Have you been following me? It's a small town. Every way you turn, I guess we're gonna run into each other.
Dad, you should have just punched him out. Yeah, you know how to fight weird, and you do that for a living.
This guy, he threatened you? He's clever, so that the law can't touch him. You have a daughter around 16?
16? What?
Now, come out wherever you are.
You, sir, will be hearing from the Ethics Committee.
All right, that was the trailer for Martin Scorsese's 1991 Cape Fear. Immediate thoughts or reactions? What do you got?
Fun fact, this is, I think, the first rescreening title released the year we were born, so that's kind of a fun little throwback.
For sure.
I thought this movie was slightly different than what we just witnessed. The trailer is very dated.
Mm-hmm.
However, I'm almost more excited now to see what exactly Scorsese's up to. Gregory Peck has a small supporting role in this, from what I understand. De Niro's in there, Nick Nolte, who I never got to know is like a main action star or a main like leading man. There's just a lot to the history of cinema that this film is going to learn me, and there looks like there's at least a few great cinematic moments of like turbulent violence and intimidation. So I'm a little bit excited. My interest is piqued. This is a nice almost summer movie.
Yeah, you got Robert Mitchum as well, our sociopath from Night of the Hunter, not playing the sociopath this time around. Kind of a nice mix of like new school actors and old school actors.
You know?
Who knows? You're right. Maybe there's the twist. This is one I have seen before. I saw it when I was young, and I remember the climax actually pretty vividly, and I remember not much else about the movie, but I remember the climax kind of scaring me as a kid. This is one I think my dad told me to watch just when I was probably just looking for something to watch. I feel like it's kind of an under-discussed Scorsese movie. It's not even one that like I kind of like most associate with him. It doesn't even really kind of like look obviously like a Scorsese movie to me, except for Robert De Niro being in here. But that will maybe be fun to talk about, is what is Scorsese-ish about this. It's maybe
because this is like in between Casino and Goodfellas. And,
right.
Yeah, this is definitely not the Marty we talk about, which is why I was drawn to it. I remember I watched this as a child too, and I don't remember why I was scared, but I remember being scared. And I had it in my head that it was a very different movie that I was scared of.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a fun revisit, absolutely.
For sure. Any other Scorsese titles you have not yet gotten to that you would watch ahead of time, or just are yet to see?
Definitely. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of Scorsese homework here. I'm also going to revisit The Departed this month. So it's about time for me to have fun with that ride. I particularly really like that basic film. You know, we
Yeah.
kind of, I think, look down our noses at that as a Scorsese entry amongst cinephiles, but I really, really enjoy it. But there's
Departed? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like that has its supporters.
It
I would have maybe
does,
said Gangs of New York.
but
It's
it's kind of the Fight Club, you know, like it's a lot of film bro disregardation.
That's true.
Of
That's true.
Departed fans. But there's a lot of 70s and 80s films from him that I haven't seen. I think there's one that he did with Christian Bale in the 80s that I want to see. Yeah, there's tons. Do you have any?
I do. I don't know how much like overlap I even have like between this movie and some of the ones I haven't seen, like Last Temptation of Christ. I want to see that. I don't know how much I'll have. I don't know that there will be too many connections there. Never seen Raging Bull. Good excuse
I also
to see
haven't
that.
seen Raging Bull. Yeah.
Just for the De Niro connection, I'd probably do that. New York, New York, which I think is the musical also with De Niro. That might be kind of fun. Yeah, definitely still ones that I still have to get to.
Yeah. All right, back to The Big Heat.
Why don't we stop the cross-examination? I didn't come up here to talk out of school.
Why did you come up?
Why don't we call it research or something?
All right, a film noir from Fritz Lang. Again, this is from 1953. From a script by Sidney Bohm. It's originally based on a story by William P. McGivern. I think it was originally published as a serial in a newspaper, and then was turned into a novel. You said you were maybe underwhelmed on first viewing? Is that what I was gathering?
Yeah. I think that I was coming off of Destiny, expecting a big hitter. I just watched M right before I put this one in, and it's so fundamentally different a film than his silent films. And it's so much less expressionistic in the lighting and shadow and reflection department. The screenplay is very, very broad in the sense that, like, if I told you the beats of this story, you would understand and have a visual idea of it because of so many other stories that are very similar or have different similar moments. But that's kind of the genius of it and the way that he plays it. There's some motifs that he has in which the female characters always disappear before the resolution. Like, the resolution is entirely dependent on them, but they also disappear. In like every single one of his films. He's a very interesting filmmaker. And I liked it a lot more this go around. But I'd also adjusted into some newer Lang with some more more of him in his talkies, English talkies, rather than foreign language, or meaning German or silent downright.
No language, you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is funny to think of it like on one hand as a Fritz Lang film, which makes it seem so striking to just compare the American movies to the German ones, and the idea that this is like a 90-minute crime thriller versus the kind of epic expressionism of the German films. It's like, how did one man make these two different kinds of movies that can feel so different? Obviously, you see the traces of expressionism in the noirs, but the scale feels so different. You know, something like Destiny feels like a giant canvas and painterly, and this is so much more tight and scaled down.
And Metropolis is equally huge.
Yeah,
is it's a different type of enormity. It's this timeless tale of a serial killer of little girls, and it's just, there's so much more big, but the tale here is just as big, but the filmmaking is a lot smaller. It's a lot tighter. It's more controlled. And as much as I say that it's less expressionistic, there's iconic scenes here. There's a moment with a man looming over our main character, or our main female character, played by Gloria Graham. And she's, it's not watching them that's important. It's watching their shadows and, her shirking in fright as he's looming over her. And there's some great mirror work in the widow's home.
Yeah. It just to kind of run with the light and shadow stuff. Like, I think that is all there, and it's a very good looking movie. It feels like a relatively restrained film noir in that sense, where other noirs can have really striking compositions with some kind of elaborate shadow work. There are plenty of images that I love here, but it all feels a little more just kind of scaled back. I more often find myself loving noirs for style, and I do like the style here, but even more, I like some of the performances. I think that's what really makes it work for me, and some of the side characters. Yeah, I think there's some great acting. Talk a little bit about the story, lay that out.
Yes. A man may or may not have killed himself. His wife places a call saying that she's this man's widow. And the plot mechanics ensue. We get a detective on the case. It's an open and shut case of a suicide. And then there's a lead. And he disregards the lead because it's an open and shut suicide. She's found in the street murdered after being tortured. And that really kind of sets the ball rolling for a lot of brutality towards everybody, but the most deference in screen time and storyline is given to the brutalities towards women, even though men are equally disappeared without so much as a sentence, more than the fact that they're disposed of.
For sure, yeah. So just
Larry's gone.
Just your description alone hits on just the violence of the movie. We open with a suicide that our then lead man, Dave Banyan, played by Glenn Ford, is tasked with investigating. You mentioned the first woman who we see get killed off is the character's name is Lucy Chapman. She's played by Dorothy Green. This does feel like far and away one of the more sadistic film noirs that I've seen from 30s, 40s, 50s.
I think, God, who were we just talking about? The Night of the Hunter. I think that's a particularly sadistic one.
100%. Just a couple years away, I think, too, right? I think that was like 55. Rafifi came to mind, too. There's also some, I think, much fewer incidents, but there is some violence towards women that stands out in that one as well. But I think this movie does feel very conscious of all of the violence directed towards women. I think the gender dynamics are very much one of the more interesting aspects of this movie.
And of Lang's storytelling, because Metropolis, Woman in the Window, Destiny, all of these are have at least moments of brutality or suffering or sacrifice of women. Right? Metropolis is strapping the woman to the furnace, or the whatever it is that they light on fire, Joan of Arc style. Woman in the Window, I don't want to give away for anyone, but literally everything is about the woman in the window. And once she's gone, everything changes, we'll say. It's definitely a motif with Lang. It's not just this screenplay or just this version. He's really getting something, I think, deeper in like the history of storytelling there.
Yeah. And I guess what was striking for me was this idea that it is, it's all the women in this movie with some kind of disreputable social standing, who are regarded as just completely disposable, and it's by almost everyone. I was like kind of taking notes on the second viewing of how many times we hear some kind of like snippet of dialogue that regards these women, whether they're, Lucy Chapman, who's like, she works at the bar. I'm actually not quite sure what she does at the bar.
Yeah, right. Wink, wink. She works at the bar.
Exactly. They call her a barfly. But
do you want a drink? They say, and she's like, "No, I'm not working tonight."
Yeah.
That indicates like as much as you can, I think, with the MPAA at this point in time.
Yeah. So we don't see her murdered, but it's described in graphic detail of her having been found, off the side of the road with cigarette burns on her, and that's our hint as to who
the
did it.
The newspaper says beaten and tortured.
Yeah, it's vivid. And, there is some violence that's on screen, that's some that's off screen. I think there's kind of a nice balance between the two. But yeah, when Banyan, our lead detective, first goes to the coroner after she has been murdered, he says things catch up with girls like that. Then he goes to his boss's office because his boss is telling him to stop investigating this. Mm-hmm. And he says when barflies get killed, it's for one of a dozen reasons. And then he goes to the bar, the retreat. The bartender there says, with regard to girls like Lucy, they come and go like flies. Again, the fly thing. They know no one cares about what happens to them. They're floaters, not much more than a suitcase full of nothing between them and the gutter. Mm-hmm. Just brutal, just barbaric talk about women in these, what they see as these morally disreputable positions, which is all striking in and of itself, but I think it's very interesting in contrast to one particular a part of this movie, which is our head crime boss. His name is Lagana, I think. In his office, his kind of criminal lair, which is this mansion, he has this portrait of his mother above the mantelpiece, and it's sort of a random detail that it hones in on at a couple points, and this idea that women with a certain degree of power or class or respect, they earn a certain degree of respect, and other women do not.
Well, do you remember what he says about his mother?
I don't remember the specifics. Do you remember?
If I remember, I mean, this is loose. I believe what he says is that she never came to terms with his success. She spent the whole end of her life, reeling from the amount of success that he had. And particularly that criminal lair looking thing and like the entryway, just that whole mansion. And I think the portrait, I don't know if it's man or woman, if I remember correctly, is all like almost exactly lifted in that styling in Once Upon a Time in America at the end with James Woods and his lair. And there's the buttons that he pushes in the big heat. There's equally buttons for James Woods to push. But some of those buttons call people, which is what he uses the buttons for, and some of them make different cameras and televisions come on. And I'm pretty certain that Leone like directly lifted kind of that look and that austerity almost. Yeah,
that stood out to me. The idea that a certain kind of woman can have a portrait made of her, while other women are treated as completely disposable. And that ultimately kind of concludes with Gloria Graham's line to the officer who killed himself's wife, and she says, under the mean, we're the same, we're sisters. At the end of the day, we are both women. We have this common humanity.
I was looking forward to talking about Easy Living.
Oh yeah, more mink coats. Or was that a sable coat, mink coat? It's coats.
But there's
the significance of them.
I think through us watching that film, we now understand the significance of what those coats mean in a film like this, right? Because that was just kind of common knowledge back then. You didn't say that. It's kind of like looking at the imprint of contraceptive in a man's wallet. You know what that is. You don't need to say it. I think that the coat was kind of something like that.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes for a striking image too, because it is literally like the exact same coat that they're wearing in that moment. This image that does literally kind of level the playing field between them, where her name is Bertha Duncan, the wife of the officer who committed suicide. She's the officer, or she's the wife of a police officer. She has a certain respect about her. She has manners, and she's cultured and kind of classy, and that's very different from Gloria Graham's gangsters maul. But in that moment, like, it's just the two of them. They're just two women, one against the other. I like the leveling of the playing field there.
It's a fantastic scene. You went to one of the best scenes pretty quickly.
I know.
But earlier in the film, in the very beginning, the first time I watched it, I didn't. So I've watched and read enough that I had a feeling that she was in on something when he turned up. But I really appreciated the performance this time around. That first time around, the way that she was playing it and answering his questions, I was just like, this is a little bit too hammy. But just kind of getting myself into the milieu of that time now, watching more Lang, or briefly before this, slightly after this, I kind of appreciate the way that she played it more. There's only 4 lines where she really gives away that there's more going on here than you would know. And the way that he plays it is like he just takes her completely seriously and never questions her at all. And that ended up working for me a lot more. I also really liked the Larry gag more the second time around. It was a lot funner.
What was the Larry gag? Remind me.
So there's a guy named Larry who had something to do with his wife getting murdered.
Mm-hmm.
He called the shot or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure out who this guy is, and he finds out that this guy Larry is at the retreat. But he doesn't know his last name, so he tells someone to call while he's at the retreat and ask for Larry. And the bar keeps like, "What's their last name?" And if you don't even know their last name, how am I supposed to know? And he just hangs up.
Yeah. It's a good scene. Yeah, I remember that scene opens with like a close up on the clock because we know Bannion's expecting the phone to ring at 9 or 9:30, a specific time. Yeah. So you had that close up of the clock, and the camera kind of pulls back to show us where we are, which is the way a couple scenes start. That kind of stood out to me. There's another one where we open on a liquor glass as the bartender is polishing it, and it pulls back, and we're in the bar again. And then there's one time we're on the painting, pull back, and we're in the
great little
office.
Just zoom out.
Put us in the scene by kind of pulling back. Yeah, I like those little details. But yeah, I was struck by the opening scene even more on the second go round, and just how immediately Bertha Duncan, the wife of this suicidal cop, picks up the phone and starts putting this plan in motion for her to continue receiving payments from the crime syndicate. Like his body is literally still warm, and there's no grief whatsoever. We know later that the relationship wasn't great, but still, it's immediately set into motion her blackmail scheme.
So let me ask you this: how certain are you it was suicide?
I feel pretty good that it was suicide. You?
60-40.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
What do you think the alternative is here?
That he was gonna leave her.
Oh,
and she wanted to keep her lifestyle, so she killed him, became a widow, and had the leverage to get rich and do whatever the heck she wanted because she wouldn't be beholden to a cheating husband anymore.
Also very dark.
Right?
Particularly dark film, in my opinion, for sure.
But it doesn't feel like that, necessarily. You just, like, have to notice it, where you're like, oh, his wife was just car bombed after another girl was killed, right before the other girl was mutilated and then killed.
Yeah, I mean, by today's standards, I suppose it is relatively tame.
Well, it's just the way that it's played, right? The content is brutal, but the way that you see the content, it's
or don't see it.
It doesn't really, it doesn't hit you quite as impactfully, and then it's like on recollection, on deeper thought about what the implications are, you're like, oh, Jesus.
I guess I would say that it actually did kind of hit me, maybe more so on second viewing. I actually did find that, like, just so tragic. It's Lucy Chapman's death in particular, just because it's so disregarded. And you're right, the movie is not really underlining, the tragedy of it. It's all kind of about just how people talk about it.
Yeah, which is almost like the genius of it, right? That's why it was better the second time, because you're kind of seeing this thing that he's doing where it's like, look how little mutilation, torture, and murder matter.
Yeah. And there's no one really grieving about it. That the suicide happens, and there is zero grief on the wife's face. She just moved right along. She is actually kind of delighted to exploit this. And then we don't really see any grief from Banyan, our lead detective, after his wife is car bombed, because he's more consumed by vengeance. So this idea that he
becomes the Punisher.
Yeah, the idea that people are consumed by feelings other than grief. They're motivated by other things, whether it's vengeance or, in her case, just self-interest. There's no space for grief in this movie.
100%. There's a few moments with him and his family and his wife where, they kind of set up the big reversal for him, but he just kind of always has that cold distance that a great noir lead has, where you're just like, when the film ends, you don't feel like you just got disconnected from someone you grew close to the way that you would in so many other films. This is a very precarious distance that we have with him, and we're not sure how far he's going to go and if we're going to disagree with his choices, which is I maybe something that Lang does do. He played M. Have you seen M?
Yeah.
That's a very interesting film because he gives a lot of leash for the serial killer of little girls to pretend that he's not the serial killer during one of those mock trials.
The criminal trial at the end.
Well, the kangaroo court, when the townspepeople have him herded downstairs, right? They give him like a couple minutes of like denying the charges, and you're just watching him squirm, and he I think lets angles sit longer of like brutality and like crimes longer than other directors would. There's also two references that I found really interesting. One of which is when his daughter is being watched by his brother-in-law and all his brother-in-law's like friends. Some of them are army and stuff. And they're playing poker and drinking, and one of the guys is like, I think he asks, "Do you know where they're coming from?" Because he wants to go. And he kind of just spouts into this war story where he's like, "Whoever's coming, they didn't have the stones to do what I did. They wouldn't have done it even in a tank, and Totally. And then we hear the breakdown about how he was in World War II and how he won the Medal of Honor. And it's just like this fun aside that really puts us in the time and the place. And the other one is when he shows up, I think in the kind of the crime boss's lair, and he starts talking about how these look like prohibition killings.
Oh, right.
I thought that was such an interesting detail that really placed us in the time, because that meant something then, and that doesn't mean anything now unless you're like studied on it, right? Because the prohibition killings, that kind of means like mafia, but it also means like illegal liquor sales and like competing businesses maybe, or taking out a cop that was going to rat on you, like, and just how brutal those killings probably were to send a message. I just thought those details were really interesting and enriched the world really quickly.
Yeah, the scene with the war buddies in particular was like one of the only scenes where I felt kind of safe. I was like, let's just stay with these dudes for a while, because they're the only ones who seem to have this place kind of locked down. I don't think so either. Like, just hang out, Banyan, take a load off. These guys seem just fine. It's like a little bit moment, kind of like a breather amidst a lot of other just terribleness. They feel safe. I feel protected by them for sure. Yeah, totally with you there. What else? Yeah, this is kind of a common noir thing, but just the idea of how many people in this are motivated by self-interest.
Who wasn't?
That's maybe the easier question to ask, but unfortunately my examples are the reverse, where, I think of Banyan first showing up at the mansion, Lagana, the crime boss's mansion, and he's talking to the cop who's kind of like patrolling the grounds, and he says, how do you like working here, or something like that to the cop, and he says, I'm just doing my job, I'm just doing my thing, I'm just playing my part in this.
And then they talk about the taxpayers, $100 a day.
Yeah. He goes to the auto yard at one point because he's trying to follow a tip about who might have car bombed his wife. I gotta find a different way to phrase that.
That's what happened.
But that is what happened.
The person who made the car self-immolate his wife.
Yeah. But the guy at the truck yard doesn't want to tell him anything, and he says, "Hey, I got wife and kids. Like, I'm not gonna talk again." He's just looking out for his own skin. And then when Banyan finally finds the infamous Larry, Larry again says, "Hey, I was just doing my job."
Larry Gordon.
Larry Gordon says, I was just doing my job."
And then what do we get? 4 sentences. Larry tried to make a quick run to the airport. He's dead now.
Yeah, exactly. Larry does not meet a happy fate.
He ran so quick, he must have really squealed.
Yeah, while the off-screen violence of Lucy Chapman actually does affect me, the Larry Gordon off-screen death, not so much.
Yeah.
He just dies, and that's
You're
fine.
like, I don't even know if I trust you. It's not in the newspaper.
That was very fast. And then at the very end, I still don't know what to make of the final few moments as Banyan is, sitting over Gloria Graham and she's dying, and he's talking about his wife, and I realized like that's kind of something she asked for, was for him to be honest about how he loved his wife or something like that. But it's still kind of weird to me that as she's dying, he's talking about his wife, his relationship. There's something about how at the end of the day, everyone's most concerned with themselves and their relationships. He's not even really consoling her as she dies. Yeah, I don't know.
I think I've got a different read on that. So she I think is seeking intimacy, not physical sexuality or interest in her, but actual intimacy. And he's been totally cold this whole time. This is the first time he's talking to her about what he actually loves.
Yeah.
And he's talking about his wife, and she's listening and alive still. And I believe that when she dies is when he pivots and starts talking about his daughter. And so when she dies, it's kind of that he was sharing his personal intimacies about what he actually loves and cares about. And it's also, making the deeper storytelling point that, her actions have changed him from being the archetypal Punisher character, anti-hero, to being someone who can love and feel again.
I can totally get behind that, especially because her hearing him express true love for his wife means that she didn't sacrifice herself for nothing. It was for his
something real,
redemption,
which is not maybe what she sees her life as.
Yeah. How'd you like the scenes with Banyan and his wife at their house? I feel like those have a considerably different tone.
I love those scenes. I wish that was a separate movie, and I could just watch her cook medium rare steaks that make him go to the office and tell him that he's married to an heiress. Heiress comes up a few times too, right? Because Gloria asks him, "What do you think I was or what do you think I was, an heiress before I met him or something?" And he makes the comment, I never thought about you, and she takes that a little bit harsh. Yeah. But then his wife makes the point about the heiress. I think that people were a little bit obsessed with inheriting things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, on first viewing, whenever we go back to Banyan's home with the wife and daughter, and the music really shifts, it's just like cozy melodrama for these domestic melodrama for these moments. I thought, I was like, is this almost ironic or something at first? I don't know that it actually is, but it is a very stark contrast in tone from the menace of scenes otherwise. But I like those scenes too. They're nice. Yeah,
and I think they kind of inform, like, the guy at the junkyard, where it's like, that feeling of those scenes is the reason why he's not talking. It kind of makes him a little bit more sympathetic. One of the side characters who I really like, but I'm kind of confused storyline-wise. I feel like we're missing a few scenes here, minimum. is that older woman who works for him.
Mhm.
And, you know, she kind of shambles out and gives him the breakdown on Larry. You know, she knows it's Larry, about your height. And, you know, that's the tip. But then she helps him get Larry and shake him down. And there's never any breakdown on how we go from figuring out who Larry is to this old woman teaming up with him again and helping him knock on the door and figure out that he's in there. It's a very interesting like sub storyline that I would love a little bit more juice on.
Yeah, I mean, which I think speaks to like a broader point about the parts that the movie kind of skips over. You're right. He meets her at the truck yard, and then she's just showing up, helping him carry out a plot. We don't see the planning there, or how exactly he talked the old woman into doing that,
or how he got in touch with her again.
Yeah.
You know, did he call the junkyard and ask if he could speak to the woman?
Yeah.
Hi, this is Officer Banyan or Sergeant Banyan. I need to speak to your employee.
Yeah, pretty much. We go right from the car bombing into Banyan meeting with his boss. They talk about the funeral, but there's no grieving. There's no kind of fallout emotionally or personally for him.
That's the other thing. I kind of like it because this is a noir that almost like doesn't let melodrama exist, even though melodrama's everywhere.
I agree. It's, to me, that his having no time for grief is just kind of like the wife at the very beginning. Like, people just aren't doing that in this movie. They have other things that they're kind of motivated by, which I think is kind of interesting.
I'd be interested to know, like, if they shot those scenes and then they were edited out. Like, because he does have melodrama in many of his other films. So I'd be interested just to know a little bit more about the exact physical making of this. We've danced around a very eloquent incident that we've termed the car bombing. The car bombing is a fantastic scene. It's incredibly, like, the car is a real physical car. The window's physically cracked and broken. The windshield's physically cracked and broken. This is real smoke. This is real fire. Yeah. He has to really throw his shoulder in, really use some elbow grease to jack that car door off of the of being closed and jammed and haul her out. Yeah. And when you're watching the scene, you're not convinced that she's dead. There's just, I think that scene just pays dividends. That is not just that's not just my favorite scene probably in the movie. That's like one of my favorite scenes that we've done in Rescreening. Like, that is just, it's an incredibly memorable scene. Like, I will not forget that. Yeah, the camera like shakes a little bit, right, as it explodes. I was surprised. The sound design when they're eating in the room, right, because she goes outside to get something. And just the explosion, right? That's by far the loudest thing by a mile that we'll hear in the entire film. Yeah. I mean, I can only imagine, like, watching that in 1953 in a theater. Like, that would make you jump for sure. That would come as a shock, I think. Pretty gruesome. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, just back on the point about the things that it skips over. And then I'll drop that thread. But there is the scene where Banyan talks to Lucy Chapman at the beginning, and she's describing that she doesn't think this was a suicide. And he's very adamant with her that it was a suicide. He seems totally convinced that this is a closed and shut case at that point. And then the very next scene is him going back to the officer's wife and asking her more questions about that, which is just an interesting, like, cut, because clearly between those two scenes, he changed his mind a little bit. He thought at least he needed to go back and ask her. You know, these little moments of characterization that we don't see, or changes in, like, just character thought, is kind of interesting. Either that or the doubt was already kind of in his head and we didn't see it. But I don't know, that stood out to me. I had a slightly different read. I don't think you're wrong, but the way that I rationalized it to myself was that he's such an upstanding cop that when he's presented with new evidence and a new lead, he has to complete his follow-up. I like that. And then in the act of doing that, everything unravels just by acting as you're supposed to act in the book. You get a new lead, you go follow up, you go ask the question, and then all of a sudden this rat's nest comes out.
Totally. Gosh, I wish I could remember exactly the context now, but there's some line Banyan's wife says to him about doing how he always does things by the book or something like that. So I could totally see that. Like, he just thinks he has to.
Yeah, as a man in the film, like that's how he's playing it. I'm sure that you're right. It's an incredibly quick cut. There's zero breathing room. I'm sure there was more intended there, and that there's dailies, even if they didn't print them, for something else. But I think that the way that it ends up, it still feels true to the impression I have.
Oh,
At
yeah.
least,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I appreciate it just because it makes the film just go.
Zip.
Like, I think there is a really nice pace to this movie. I don't feel like it ever goes slack.
Did you ever get confused about the retreat?
What about it?
Right, like, there's, like, he's at the retreat, right? And then we're in a bar, and I don't think that we're told that the bar is called the retreat until someone, like, says it within the bar itself.
You're like, where are we?
Yeah, because before that, we're talking about the retreat, and I'm thinking, like, okay, so this is like a Camp David, like, evil criminal situation.
Camp David. That's hilarious.
You know, you got your 50 square miles of the retreat.
Yeah. It turns out it's just a pretty small bar.
Yeah. I was waiting for Joan Crawford to come out with slinging her 6-shooter and a guitar.
Yeah. But yeah, back to side characters in the retreat. I love that bartender.
Oh, great.
He was great. And, you know, the little kind of shift he has when Banyan first comes in and he's saying he doesn't really know anything about Lucy Chapman. He doesn't ask questions about his girls. It all amounts to kind of a shrug. Mm-hmm. And then just between that and the walk to the phone booth where he makes the call, you have a total different sense of the character. He totally seems just plain slimy and in cahoots with the criminals. It's a great little transition.
Right? And then he pops outside the phone booth and everything just switched on its head.
Totally. He has a grin that suddenly looks way more evil than before.
Yeah. And so after the confrontation where he threatens to take him in, doesn't take him in, and the barkeep kind of indicates just how much he knows by saying, "We already had you warned once today," you know? And then he turns around and he walks away, and the menacing look after him is unlike every other character in this entire it's so it's rich. There's a depth to Lang films, not just this one but all of them, and the depth I think is most interesting here because this is like one of his most stripped down run times. So there's all this depth that he must have developed. There's got to be a lot more prints that will just never see the light of day or burned or used up now, where he establishes this stuff. But because he goes to such depth, even when you strip it down and you just have this 90-minute runtime, all the depth is there, but it's more expedient. There's more speed to it. Yeah.
Which, again, in the context of everything he had done, the idea of going from the 3-hour plus epics to something 90 minutes where it just feels like he's just taking out scenes that he doesn't think he needs. Like, what a drastic sort of, concision of filmmaking between this and the older stuff.
Yeah. I know that we just did him, but Altman, you talk about Altman, you think of PTA. This is one of those guys that just strikes me as, he's a self-described workman. I do think that he's a master, but he shirked being called a master filmmaker and said that he was just a worker. He was just a workman director, and he was paid for a job and he did the job. He in some ways just reminds me of Altman. He reminds me of PTA, where it's just like there's no I've talked about some of the motifs where it's kind of these women really are the center of his films, and normally it's at their expense that kind of everyone is saved, or everyone ends up where maybe the most desired place they could be still is. And number one, I think of that because PTA, I think we can agree, is a master. Altman, I don't know if we can agree, but I think he's a master. But both of them have this very nonchalant take to their own filmmaking. Both of them see themselves as these workmen. They're men who do jobs. And Lang saw himself the same way. But I think he was a master. They're different, but they just remind me of the same type of a thing. They're not men that are up their own ass, which are some of my favorite directors, They're a different type of director, and there's just something kind of almost indefinable about how their films are similar, even though they're totally different stylings. Like it's just the quality of the when they chose to print the scene, how they're very balanced in all the different parts of filmmaking. The picture is not more important than the sound, isn't more important than the lighting, isn't more important than something else. They just put it all together, and the stories are just so consistently different, and they're going all over the place. PTA is a little bit slower, but Altman and Lang, they just kept going and going and going.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, like they're American directors that they were making comparisons between. Just the idea that this movie feels so American and he's German, just the extent to which I think this is probably true of any of the European immigrant directors, like Billy Wilder or Douglas Sirks. Maybe this isn't really a unique thing, but just the idea that it in no way feels German when the other movies feel so German, and the extent to which they just seem to have their finger on the pulse.
The Woman in the Window, which is an American film, feels German because of its nature. It's the screenplay nature, and it's just like my history with Musil or Thomas Mann, or not necessarily German, but like Austrian, Austro-Hungarian. Like it's full of references to that type of stuff. Letter to an Unknown Woman is what it's really an homage to in a lot of ways. So it's ripe there, but it's totally American, and that like you'd go watch that expecting a noir and you would have a great time. Yeah.
And maybe like that's something I'd just be curious to see if you can sense, like if you looked at the stuff those directors like him made when they first came to America. Versus the stuff they made later, because like in the scenes where with Banyan with his wife at the household, like that just seems like totally accurate 50s American household stuff. So
post-war.
Yeah, totally. He totally seems to know the culture he's working in, despite the fact that he is not from here. I guess he'd been here a while by now, but that is interesting that The Woman in the Window feels a bit more German in its influences, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you watch it, I think you'll agree.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Not particularly, but I do think we have to address the Two-Face before Two-Face was invented. It's an interesting build-up. It's an interesting scene. The retreat event happens. She follows Banyan out of the bar. She weasels her way in to going with him to his hotel. They talk. She leaves, and she lies to whatever that guy's name is. I'm forgetting. Secondary villain.
The guy who throws the coffee.
Yeah.
Vince.
Yeah, the guy who's known for torturing and
name.
beating women.
Yeah.
And he interrogates her and knows that she's lying. And she just keeps doubling down, and then he scalds half of her face. And the timing of how much time we see her bandaged or unmarred from the boil yet, and then right when she takes it off, it's a lingering moment. I think it's an incredible use of striking imagery and pacing and storytelling. That's one of the particular choices in the direction and the story that I think they just hit on all levels and really defined one of the key moments of the film, just like the car bomb.
Yeah, and I don't know. There are probably examples out there that I just don't know of. But like the thought of disfiguring your kind of lead actress of the movie partway through seems pretty bold for the 50s, when you would maybe ordinarily keep her safe and beautiful and glamorous for the whole time, and instead she gets the most gruesome like attack of anybody. It is satisfying, I think, when she
tears it off.
When she tears it off, yeah, she has that line to Banyan about like, well, maybe I'll just go through life sideways.
That's such a great line.
Such a great line. That's like both a sad line and kind of a great line, like the resilience that she's just gonna keep moving on
and
anyways.
The wittiness, like her smarts, it's so charming.
Yeah. She's the most kind of like accepting of the how corrupt all this is. You know, she has that line about money. Yeah, I've been rich and I've been poor, and believe me, rich is better. It's like, word.
It's a great line.
Yeah. She's not down about it. She just kind of accepts things as they are and kind of goes with the punches, which is a brutal way to put it, but there is something that's not just sad about what happens to her. The fact that she's willing to like go out and get vengeance is kind of awesome.
Yes. So I think my last big point here is that none of them, I don't think this is true of any of the men besides maybe the barkeep, but Gloria Graham herself, either the way that she performs as a performer or the way that Lang directed her, her physical body stylings are so silent film era. Like her actions with her body when she's upset are hysterics. Like you're looking at an actor physically playing hysterical. It's really interesting because it's a talkie, but this female performance is very, silent film where she's kind of indicating everything with her behavior. There's this great demure scene where she's in his hotel and she uninvited climbs up on the bed, takes the pillow out from under the cover, puts it up, and then she sits sideways and it just looks very proper. And it's just her physicality is just kind of indicating so much depth to this character. I don't think I've ever seen a talkie at this era where the actress who is talking is indicating so beautifully with her body in that silent film era type.
Totally. The body language very much stands out. It's a good thing to have called out that. I think about maybe the very first shot of her where she's laying on the couch. I think it's one that's actually on the cover of the Blu-ray.
It's a great scene.
The idea that she is like so at ease in this world of all these guys. We're looking at the cover right now. It looks fantastic. Highly recommended Blu-ray. Lots of great shots of her in particular. There's that one of her all bandaged up when Banyan comes back to her in the hotel room and her head's just like down. She's sitting in the corner of the room and the lights, you got your classic Venetian blinds there. That's a great shot too. Good looking stuff.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite scene?
There are small moments that I really like. I like when Banyan first gets a phone call. It's his wife actually answers the phone from, at the time he just knows that it's someone on Lagana's payroll, and it's a guy, it's who we learn is Larry, trying to scare him off from investigating all this, and it's just the shot of him, Larry, from behind in the phone booth. Just a great kind of menace to that shot. I like that one a lot. And I'll just combine that with one when Banyan's just left Bertha Duncan's house and the camera kind of pushes up to the window as she watches Banyan leave.
Great scene.
Great
cinematography.
Yeah, and again, she's the one who immediately puts on that mask whenever Banyan shows up to be all ladylike, and you see it drop there, and you see a little bit of nervousness in her eyes there. Also a great shot. So, how about you?
I'm also gonna double dip. My favorite is the most pleasant of my favorites is the scene where they're talking about the T-bone steaks, and and they start talking about the beer, and she's like, I'll have a sip of yours. And then he goes into this line about, how about I drink mine and I take a sip off yours for once. And there's just this wry coity to it, and it's so passively informing me, the viewer, of their relationship and what type of person he is, what type of person she is, and just the kind of day-to-day joy in the family. And it's a really memorable, really quick way of communicating that to me, that I really just, in a movie that opens with a suicide and we hear about women getting mutilated, tortured, and murdered. That was a nice aside. And then following that, I think that the most impressive scene is the car bomb scene, in which, there's just an incredible set piece, real fire, real smoke, a very physical performance wrenching the door off, carrying her out, her physical, real body out. And, that kind of shake to the camera, like you said, the cracks in the windows. There's just, I can't think of a scene really like that from this period of time.
Good stuff. Good stuff. That's a wrap.
On to Cape Fear.
And that's another one in the can.
Now you don't.